Welcome back everyone to another 2D to 3D video. I am Follygon, and in this video I am going to be showing you my entire digital character sculpting process from beginning to end. Click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out the links below for all of my custom brushes, materials, courses, and other fun goodies. So this time around I'm working on this pink-haired girl based on the artwork of Maya Lior. I'll be turning this 2D concept into 3D using my software of choice, ZBrush, created here on my cintiq graphics tablet that lets me use a pen to control my digital clay. I'm working on the head first. This is where I enjoy starting the most, just using a simple sphere to begin shaping up the major shapes there for the jaw, beginning to put in a cylinder for the neck, and a simple squashed cube to begin creating the ear. Then I start marking up the face, beginning to kind of put some placeholders there for areas like the brow, the eyes, the mouth, and the nose. For this, I'm using a simple brush to carve into the surface of my geometry, and then I'm using something called a move brush to just kind of push and pull the clay around. This is how I work early on with not a lot of complex brushes, keeping things relatively simple as I continue to shape up the first parts of my character. I like using brushes that carve into the surface a lot during this early process to mark out landmarks. I also enjoy using pinch brushes that grab your geometry and squeeze it together really tight. This allows me to create what is called a plane change that helps me define areas like the front of the face from the side. After a little more work, I've of course put in the eyes there with another sphere. You'll see me insert all sorts of primitive geometry in here as we go. You'll notice that the face, if you have seen the finished character, does not look quite like the final result right away. It takes quite a bit of time and back and forth, especially for a character's face, to really get it into a good spot. The face is easily the thing that takes the most amount of time to kind of get right, with hands being the only thing that's even relatively close to that in terms of difficulty. I do like to do a little extra cleanup before I move on to working on things like the body, which I am starting on right now, just to make sure that things are feeling good before I continue forward. It can be really distracting if you have some nasty stuff going on with your face and then you start working on other things. But for the most part, I like to keep things all around the same level of finish, just so everything's at the same level as I continue forward and I don't get tunnel vision and stuck working on one thing for a huge amount of time. So like I said, I'm working on the body now, or better yet, I'm working on the clothing for the torso. I'm creating the shirt and the skirt for this character. I am not creating a body for the clothing to go on top of because it's never seen. I've talked about this in many videos in the past, but if you are not going to have anything seen like a character's, upper torso and arms here, there's really no reason to go in and spend a ton of time creating that. The only reason I would recommend that you actually spend time doing that is it can sometimes be a really nice placeholder to put clothing on top of to figure out things like proportions and, your general sense for your character's height, width, etc. So for the most part, if you feel comfortable just going right into clothing that way, I recommend doing that. It's a lot faster. That's what I prefer to do here a lot of the time, and that is what I have done here on this character. Next up, I'm creating the hair, some very awkward looking pigtails to start out, as she doesn't have any hair on top of her head actually, but I like to work more on the big stuff that affects the silhouette, the larger form factor of the character, the things that make big changes early. That is where I like to start out. So big things like the hair, the silhouette like I said, and things like adding color. This can be very helpful in just figuring out proportions. For adding those colors early on, it's really simple for me, as I can just sample directly from my reference image from Maya Lior's concept and get that right on my geometry. Then I like to start working back on the face after I get some of that stuff in to work a little further, as the face is the money maker, right? It's the big focal point. It's the thing that everybody looks at right away. So you want to make sure that that is really good. So one of the things I like to do early on is put in eyebrows and eyelashes. They are extremely expressive for your character, and not having them on your face can make things feel completely off and very awkward. So I like to put those in pretty early. Next up, I'm working on those squashed cubes that I made for the ears, actually giving them some form, starting to put in, the tragus, the anti-tragus, the helix, the anti-helix, all that good ear anatomy that we all know and love. If you don't, that's okay. Ears are pretty complex. In my opinion, they're actually one of the most complex parts of the face, just because they have all these interweaving different parts kind of going together. But really, after you sculpt or draw an ear a few times, it really kind of locks in, and it's not too hard to do it in the future. But when you're doing something that's heavily stylized like I'm doing here, that doesn't necessarily conform to anatomy, you obviously have to pay good attention to your reference like I'm doing right now, and a lot of the time you also have to kind of design and make up some of it yourself for what you can't see. Obviously, you can't see with my reference image the backside of the character, so I have to kind of interpret a lot of that either based on experience or based on what I can see in the reference and try to translate that to some of the views that I don't have. When you're only working off of a single image though, it can be extremely helpful to do what I'm doing right now, which is a little bit of a proportional check. So I am taking all of the different parts of my model, I'm throwing it into a plugin that's called Transpose Master. This essentially allows me to quickly merge everything together, make some big proportional changes, line it up with my reference image, and then send it all back, and all these changes will cascade through it. And you'll see all that happen here soon, but at least for right now, I'm starting to just get everything roughly around the right place. Now, if you only work on something like a 3D character from a single view, it's gonna look really flat and really awkward. So while I'm doing this, I'm making sure that I'm wrapping around in 3D space, making sure that the volumes are wrapping properly. If I just make the pigtails fit correctly from that front view, from the side view, they're gonna look really awkward and flat. So however wide they are here from the front, I at least make them that wide from the side. It really kind of depends on what you're working on, and like I said, it comes with experience, but I am continuing to line all of that stuff up just to get a general sense here from the front. I am not going to do what's called breaking symmetry quite yet. If you're not familiar with that, that just means at this point, everything that I have made has been perfectly symmetrical, so anything that I do on the left or anything that I do on the right mirrors over to the other side automatically, which is really nice when you're, wanting to save some time during the early stages. There you can see some of the changes as I flip back and forth. But eventually here, very soon, I am going to be breaking symmetry and really pushing on this to make it feel more alive. As when it's perfectly symmetrical, it feels a little doll-like, a little awkward. It doesn't have as much life, right? So starting to break symmetry and get some more life in there later on is definitely very important. Next up, some quick teeth, which can be represented with a simple cylinder. This is a very common technique that I use. Of course, getting the gap between the two front teeth there for that effect. It's a really fun shape that the character has there for the mouth. And then I go back through, and I do this quite a lot. I just kind of jump back to the face whenever I feel like I notice anything big that I can make a big difference to. So now doing that, working on the mouth. The corner of the mouth is a really tough area. The corner of the nose and just the whole shape of the nose in general is really fun for me to work on. There's a lot of fun shapes going on there, and getting the plane strap in a nice manner is a lot of fun for me to work on for the entirety of the face. Jumping back to the body, or better yet, the clothing, to work on the shirt and begin getting some of those shapes into place. One of the things that I like to do early on when I'm sculpting is put in a lot of these really hard, sharp edges. You'll see me do that a lot. And then I'll go back through and smooth and blend those out. So that's a lot of fun for me. I enjoy getting those hard, plain changes and then working on the material a little more to make it feel more soft. In this case, we have a shirt, so making that feel more like actual fabric. You saw me put in the quick arms there, as they're not completely seen, so they kind of just disappear as they go up into the sleeves. A little awkward, I know, but the illusion kind of stands as we continue forward, and you'll see more work on that here very soon. For the hair, I create these really simple blocky shapes to start. They're actually pretty messy and ugly if you look at them closely, but we won't get too close here. And after I do that, I start breaking those shapes up. There are a ton of different techniques for creating hair, and I've received a ton of different questions about hair here on my YouTube channel. If you're interested in learning more about hair, actually, I just released a tutorial over on my Patreon. It's also available for free in the Appeal Academy if you are a member of that. On sculpting a ton of different hairstyles, going in, looking at short hair, medium length, and long hair. Here we have a little bit of a combination of two, with the pigtails in the back, more of a longer flowing style, where here in the front, more of a short or medium length, creating some complexity, getting these forms to interweave together is always a lot of fun. I always say that working on hair is very therapeutic. It can be a little difficult sometimes, a little frustrating, but if you get in the right headspace, put on a good podcast, some nice coffee shop music maybe in the background, that's a good headspace for me to be in, to just really hone in and focus on getting all that work in, because hair takes a long time to work on. Well, hey, I mentioned that we'd be breaking symmetry here very soon, and now I am doing exactly that. We're back over in what is called Transpose Master here, which is kind of a plugin in ZBrush. It's called a plugin, but it's been by default in the software for as long as I can remember, so why it's called a plugin, I honestly have no idea. But either way, plugin or not, it allows me to work on everything at the exact same time, and that means in this case, starting to put everything into position, break symmetry, start to get that sassy pose, get that lean forward, making sure that from the side, from the back, the character is looking still, very dynamic. If everything looks dynamic from the front and you turn everything to the side and it looks really flat, well, you really haven't done your job as a 3D artist, right? We have to, as a 3D artist, pay attention to every single view. I actually, on this character, went into the expression very quick. I somewhat surprised myself. I don't typically like to go into expression super fast just because you break symmetry and then there's no real way to get back. But lately, with most of my characters, I've been doing this a lot faster than what I've done in the past. And I actually enjoy it a lot. I think, maybe sometimes you'll have a little more work to do once you break symmetry. If you make a mistake, you have to go back a little bit. But for the most part, I think it saves time just by getting in there, starting to feel more expressive, starting to feel more like the final character. So I've actually been a big fan of this process a lot more lately. Well, after I go in and I start positioning everything, I start breaking symmetry, that is when I start to work on everything a little more from, the 3D view, not just from the front. So I go in, I use tools like Dynamesh and ZRemesher. These are tools that dynamically update your topology so that you can stretch and pull your polygons really far, and then with the simple click of a button, it just redistributes everything for you. And then ZRemesher is a tool that, somewhat similar to Dynamesh, goes in, it retopologizes your form for you, makes it nice and clean, and then you can do what's called projection to get your details back if you need to. But at this stage, I really don't have many details at all. I'm just kind of working on these big, clean shapes, making sure that things like the anatomy for the form is wrapping around properly for the arm. We're getting some nice contrast between sharp shapes and soft shapes. If you saw the back of the arm there, she had this really sharp edge for the elbow, but as that shape wrapped around, I started to smooth and clean that up. And I'm doing that over here with the other arm as well, starting to get that nice sharp point in the corner of the elbow, and then a nice, beautiful curve flowing down to the hand. After refining a little bit on the actual anatomy of the character, I start going in and working on the folds for the shirt. I love sculpting folds. Folds, hair, even water. If you've ever sculpted water or seen sculpted water before, they kind of all fit into the same category of what I call flow. And it is something that is so much fun to sculpt. I really enjoy working on folds. Just like hair, it can be a little therapeutic. You can get a little more messy, I think, a lot of the time with folds on a shirt. Hair tends to be a little more complicated, having more weaving or interwoven shapes, but at least with a sweater here, which is what I assume this is, with the sleeves all poofy and rolled up there, it's a little more simple. But I get to go in and work with these, again, really sharp shapes and kind of carve through and then go back after the fact and start to soften those up. The hair is another example of what I was just talking about with those interwoven shapes. I've taken those pigtails now and I've chopped them up into a lot of individual pieces, and now I'm starting to pull and push them in different ways to make them interweave with one another. The pigtails here are not, strictly speaking, interwoven in a way that really makes sense, I guess you could say. You know, it's not like real life. It's not like a braid or anything like that. I've simply created an illusion, or I'm working on that illusion, of making it feel like these shapes are kind of wrapping into one another. And that is often good enough. Plus, of course, when you have these stylized folds or braids like we do here, you have to have everything kind of feeling like the reference. I'm a big fan of working on accuracy, but if there are places that I can improve upon a 2D illustration or a concept and push that to be, you know, improved in any way, I will. But to contrast that, if you're starting to add things that just really aren't there, that don't add any benefit to the overall visual appeal or shapes or forms of your character, there's no real reason to do that. So you have to draw a bit of a fine line there and make sure that you're not going overboard, you know, whether that be with adding anatomy where it's not, or adding braids to hair or extra little hairs that aren't really there. Of course, I've already talked about this face a ton, but I have to go back in here and start painting it, which is what I was just doing, and now some little touches of freckles there around the face. For the freckles here, I actually was able to line up the reference image and get the freckles in the exact same location as the 2D artwork. The same thing here with these little straight lines that I'm using to create the lower eyelashes. It's a very graphic effect that, in my opinion, doesn't always translate to 3D, but I actually really enjoyed the way it looked with this character. So I'm a big fan of the way that turned out, as well as some of the hand painting that I do to the eyes here. Hand painting eyes is always a lot of fun. For here, at least in ZBrush, for those that are familiar with some of the materials and how the system here works, everything is currently the exact same material. So the eyes don't have a reflective material on them. I actually hand painted that little reflection, making that illusion kind of play well there. Currently, I'm just using the ZBrush paint material, very similar to the default Skin Shade 4, so if you're looking for something similar to what I use, that's probably a good place to start. And then we're right off again to more work here on the clothing, doing some more folds, creating some pockets for the skirt. I really love the way that this turned out. I thought it looked super sharp, super clean, and really enjoyed working on it. I mean, normally I don't get things right, you know, correct or perfect in the first go, but at least here with these pockets and those quick folds on the skirt, I really enjoyed the way that those came out right away. Okay, so something super fun about this character, if you've seen the 2D concept, which of course by now I've had it up on screen multiple times, she is cut off somewhere around the mid-thigh region. You know, that's how the image is cropped. That is the only image that I have as a reference, but I decided that, hey, this character could use some legs. I've been working on this thing for a while, and I would love to give her some legs. I'd love to make her a full character instead of just a bust or, you know, a simple waist up or, you know, around their mid-thigh region. So I went in, I started to give her some legs. We'll come back and talk more about that later, because to start doing that or start getting that weight and balance and pose feeling correct, I actually had to do a lot of work. I had to stand up myself and start to act out the pose and get that feeling proper, but I'll show you some more on that here very soon. I've started to do lots of little details now as I'm starting to finish up the character more, which means adding things like the bubbly star to her sweater, working on little tiny pieces like the zipper on the skirt, which was made using poly modeling tools, if you're familiar with those, and if you're not, it's called the Z Modeler brush here in ZBrush. It essentially allows me, instead of sculpting with brushes, I more so use tools that allow me to manually go in and manipulate every single edge of a polygon, every single face, every single point, one by one by one. So it's a little more of a technical way to work, and I don't use it a ton, but I use it for little tiny pieces like that. So anything that you would consider hard surface or mechanical maybe is a great place to use that tool. If you remember, I mentioned way back at the beginning of the video that faces are the hardest thing to work on, and the second most difficult thing to work on is hands. And hands in particular can be even more difficult depending on what they're doing. If you just have a hand resting down at your side, it's, relatively easy in terms of hands. But if you have a hand resting on a hip, or interacting with something else in really any way, it becomes, 10 times, 20 times harder, in my opinion. Anytime a hand is interacting with anything, it's a lot more difficult. So the hand resting on the hip, not only do I have to make that look believable from every angle, but I also have to get that to line up perfectly with that front view. So trying to get that as accurate as possible while also making it look believable and, make sense from every other angles is actually quite a challenge. So just like working on my hair, I put on some chill coffee shop vibes and got focused and got to work. One of the hardest parts of hands is keeping things from fusing together in your fingers, and I actually have a few tricks here that maybe I can talk more in depth about in the future, or maybe that could be a future tutorial. I think that would be an awesome topic to go more in depth on. But hey, I still have a lot more that I want to show you here. So here are the feet, starting to work on those. Like I said, I had to stand up and act out this pose to really start to get a sense for the balance of the character. I did not have a full reference. I didn't have a side view for this character. I had no idea, just looking at it, where those legs should go. I've been doing this a while, and just looking at a character, I can sometimes get a gist or a general idea for the pose, but often I have to stand up and act it out, feel where my weight is. I'll even kind of switch things up and switch my feet around just to see how that changes things, to really make sure that I understand how this pose is working. This one, a lot of that weight is going to be on the straight leg, with that back leg on the ball of her foot kind of supporting that a little. And then, of course, every 3D character has to have a knife. This was, I don't remember why exactly I had this idea, but I thought, just kind of looking at the reference for the character, she's standing and she's got this one hand behind her back, so nonchalant, and I was just kind of thinking, what if she was holding something? What could she be holding back there? And she looks a little suspicious maybe, so maybe she's holding something a little dangerous. So hence the idea for the knife was born. So I grabbed this quick clip art online and began to use that as a basis for measuring out my proportions. Again, using the Z modeler brush to do most of the work for that. And then after I spent a little bit of time positioning that for the character's hand, I realized that I had done it again. I had made myself another hand that needed to grab something or interact with something else. So I ended up creating a lot more work for myself, but in the end, I think that it's definitely worth it. Overall, I think it reads really well. I think it's kind of funny, and it allowed me to make this meme. Which is one of my favorite memes right now. If you guys haven't seen that one, it's really popular on TikTok. There's a ton of different variations of it. But hey, I'm a 3D modeler, a 3D character artist, so I had to get into the fun and put my own spin on it. After finishing up this hand, I go into what is called the stage of polish, or sometimes I'll call it final touches. This is the point at which I go in and I push everything to be as good as it possibly can. It's also the point at which I recommend taking a break, taking a little time off, whether that be a day or a week, or sometimes for, some people it's just an hour to step away, go for a quick walk, come back. Whatever helps you to kind of refresh and come back with fresh perspective at this point is a great use of your time. So I actually spent a few days off on this character, came back to it with some new, fresh perspective, and got to work on the tiniest little details. I actually overdid it some in the hair, which ended up being okay. I went back and worked on the hair a lot and got it to a really nice place. And you will see some of that very nice hair finished up, and of course the whole character here in just a moment. But first, I need to package up, decimate, and send all these individual parts over to Blender for rendering. If you are interested in the process here, you can check out my rendering tutorial over on my Gumroad, and of course for members of the Appeal Academy, it is included as a free download there. Here is my setup for the character over in Blender. It's a really simple setup. I have a curved plane that kind of represents this infinity-like studio effect, very common for people that photograph products, so I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that. And just 4 lights, really. It's not complicated, like I said. I use simple materials to render as well, and let my good forms do all of the talking. I really enjoy, I will say, coming in here and playing with some different ideas for lighting. I typically like to do some really strong rim lights that helps it pop from the background as well. But either way, now for the part that so many skip to, the final renders. Hello, skippers. Glad to see you. Hey, if you like what you see though, I think you'll also really enjoy learning more about the process of how I made this character. Consider going back through and giving it a watch if you did just so happen to skip here to the end. Yeah, I know, I got you. But either way, thank you so much for checking out my art. I appreciate you and I appreciate your time. If you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, check out the links below in the description. My Gumroad is where you can find all of my tutorials, all of my custom brushes. It's where you can find the Appeal Academy as well. Sign up for that, there's a ton of stuff in that. It's an ever-growing, huge course of content with access to me and my Discord. It's a great place, a great community, and we would all love to have you. And of course, if you're not ready for the Appeal Academy yet, I recommend checking out my Patreon first. That's also another way that you can get some great tutorials, as well as access to my private Discord. Well, hey, this video is not free. You have to pay up. And the way you can do that is if you are new around here, you can click that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the video and you're not new around here and you're already a subscriber, click that like button. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.